Imagine a world where a specific brand name is the ultimate passport to respectability.
Hmm.
And I'm not talking about a fashion brand like Gucci or, a tech brand like Apple.
No, no.
I'm talking about something much drier, but in the corporate world, infinitely more powerful. I want you to imagine a company that was the absolute gold standard of integrity.
The kind of place where if you had their name on your resume, it was like having a seal of approval from, I don't know, the Pope of capitalism.
Exactly. A firm where if they signed off on your financial statements, the markets didn't just believe you, they revered you. A company that employed 28,000 people.
28,000.
A company that was bringing in over $9 billion in revenue a year. A titan.
And then imagine that this titan, this pillar of American commerce just evaporates
Poof. Gone.
into thin air.
In a matter of months, it goes from being the backbone of corporate trust to being a punchline on late-night TV. It becomes a cautionary tale taught in every business school ethics class from here to, well, Timbuktu. We are, of course, talking about the rise and fall of Arthur Andersen.
The tragedy of Arthur Andersen. And I'm glad you used that word tragedy, because that is really the only way to frame this. Usually when we do these deep dives into business failures, we're talking about bad strategy.
Right.
We're talking about a CEO who bet on the wrong technology, or a marketing campaign that flopped, or just getting outcompeted. It's usually a story about math.
Yeah, business errors. Blockbuster didn't buy Netflix. Kodak ignored digital cameras.
Exactly. Those are calculation errors.
Yeah.
But the story of Arthur Andersen isn't about a miscalculation. It's a Shakespearean character arc. It's about a moral collapse.
It is.
It's about a firm that spent nearly a century building this fortress of honesty, only to blow it up from the inside because they forgot who they were.
It really is wild. I mean, most people listening today, especially if they are younger or just not deep in the finance weeds, they know the big four accounting firms.
Right. Deloitte, PwC,
Yeah.
EY, KPMG.
They're the giants. But for a very, very long time, it was the big five. And Arthur Andersen wasn't just one of the five. In many ways, it was the leader. It was the alpha.
It was the firm that defined the profession. And that is what makes this deep dive so fascinating and, frankly, so unsettling. We aren't just going to look at the Enron shredding party, though. Believe me, we are going to get into the details of it.
Oh, we have to. The shredding party is a must.
But to understand why the shredding matters, we have to understand the 89 years that came before it. We've got a massive stack of sources here: biographies, legal breakdowns from the Supreme Court, internal memos, you name it. We're going to trace this arc from 1913 all the way to a ruling in 2005 that it changes everything you think you know about the ending.
And the central tension we're going to be exploring today is really a battle for the soul of this institution. It's a battle between the founders' original motto, think straight, talk straight, and the later era's obsession with profit that led them straight into the abyss.
Which, as we know, leads us inevitably to Enron. But we can't start with Enron. That's the third act. We have to start with the protagonist.
So let's go back, way back. Let's set the scene. It's the early 1900s, and we need to talk about Arthur E. Andersen, because his origin story is, honestly, reading through these notes, it felt like I was reading a Charles Dickens novel.
It really is. It's the classic American struggle, but turned up to 11. Arthur Andersen was born in 1885 in Plano, Illinois. And his start in life was not easy. By the time he is 16 years old, tragedy strikes. His parents die.
16. I mean, that is a child. No parents, no safety net, no trust fund.
None. He is completely orphaned. Now, in 1901, there is no social safety net to speak of. If you don't work, you don't eat. It's that simple. So he has to take a job as a mail boy during the day just to survive.
And most people in that situation, you'd forgive them for just trying to get by, just trying to survive day to day.
Right. But Arthur Andersen had this fire in him, this relentless drive. He works as a mail boy all day long, and then instead of collapsing, he goes to school at night. He's determined to educate himself out of poverty.
That work all day, study all night mentality, that's deep programming. That forges a person in a very specific way.
It absolutely does. He eventually gets a job as an assistant to a controller at a company, but he just keeps pushing. He keeps taking those night courses. And by 1908, at the age of 23, he achieves something incredible.
What's that?
He becomes the youngest certified public accountant, or CPA, in the entire state of Illinois.
23 years old. I don't think I knew what a balance sheet was at 23, let alone being the youngest CPA in the state.
It just speaks to his intellect, but I think more importantly, to his discipline. And that discipline becomes the DNA of the firm he builds. So in 1913, he teams up with a guy named Clarence Delaney, and they found Andersen, Delaney & Co.
And Delaney eventually leaves, right? That's why we don't know that name.
He does. And in 1918, it becomes Arthur Andersen & Co.
Yeah.
But that year, 1913, is the birth. And I love looking at the very beginning of these massive corporations. Do we know who their first client was?
I do, and I love this detail because it's so grounded. Their first client was the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company.
The beer guys.
The beer guys in Milwaukee. And this wasn't just a cold call or anything. Andersen had actually worked there as a controller previously.
Ah, so he was using his network.
Exactly. It shows you that even at 28, he understood the value of his network. Because of that relationship, they opened their second office in Milwaukee in 1915. So he's young, he's hungry, he's got a beer client. But here's the thing that really struck me in the research. Usually when a young guy starts a firm in the roaring teens or 20s, the goal is make money, get rich, build an empire. But Arthur Andersen seemed to have a completely different philosophical approach to what an accountant is supposed to be.
This is the crucial nugget. This is the seed of everything. If you miss this, you miss the tragedy. Arthur Andersen believed that accounting wasn't just about crunching numbers for the boss.
Right.
He didn't think he worked for the CEO of the company he was auditing. He believed that an accountant's primary responsibility was to the investors.
That is a radical distinction. I'm paid by the client, but I work for the public.
Exactly. He viewed the accountant as a public watchdog, a gatekeeper. If the management was lying or inflating numbers or hiding losses, it was his job to expose it, not help them hide it. And this is where that famous motto comes in.
Think straight, talk straight.
Think straight, talk straight. And let's be clear, this wasn't some corporate synergy buzzword cooked up by a marketing team at a glass office.
Bro.
This was an axiom his mother had passed down to him before she died. It was core to his identity as a human being.
There is a famous story from the early years, the railway anecdote, that really illustrates this. I feel like this is the moment that cemented the legend. It's like the George Washington cherry tree story, but for accountants.
It is the defining mythos of the firm. So set the scene. It's the early years. The firm is growing, but it's still vulnerable. A frantic executive from a local rail utility comes to Arthur Andersen. This executive is in real trouble. The company's accounts are flawed.
Flawed how? Like bad math or...
Basically, the books are cooked, or at least very messy and misleading. They don't reflect the reality of the business. But the executive needs Andersen to sign off on them anyway. He says if Andersen doesn't certify the books, the utility is going to lose a major contract.
So it's a do-or-die moment for this client. The executive is putting the screws to him.
Huge pressure. He's essentially saying, sign this paper, save my company, or we take our business elsewhere and I ruin your little startup firm. It's the ultimate test of that motto.
Right.
And Arthur Andersen looks him in the eye, this powerful railroad executive, and says there is not enough money in the city of Chicago to make him do it.
Not enough money in the city of Chicago. I mean, I got chills reading that. That is a power move.
It is. And the railroad executive, furious, fires him on the spot. Andersen loses the client. Financially, it was a hit. But a few months later, that railroad went bankrupt.
Wow.
It collapsed. And that bankruptcy validated everything Andersen stood for. It proved that his integrity wasn't just a high moral stance. It was actually good business foresight.
Because if he had signed those papers, his reputation would have been destroyed. He would have been dragged down with the ship.
Exactly. Instead, he built a reputation as the guy who couldn't be bought. He became the guy who saved you from yourself, basically. Banks started saying, we will lend to you, but only if Arthur Andersen audits your books. The signature became the asset.
And that reputation created a very specific culture within the firm. As it grew, the employees developed a nickname for themselves.
They did. They called themselves Arthur Androids.
Arthur Androids. Now, to me, sitting here in the 2020s, that sounds terrible. It sounds like mindless robots.
It does to modern ears, but you have to understand the intent at the time. It wasn't about being mindless. It was about consistency. It was about reliability.
Okay.
The idea was that whether a client walked into an Arthur Andersen office in Chicago or New York or eventually London or Tokyo, they would get the exact same high standard of service.
Like the McDonald's of high finance, but, you know, classy.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
Standardization. Andersen was actually a pioneer in training. He created the profession's first centralized training program. They had this massive facility in St. Charles, Illinois.
The Q Center.
The Q Center.
Oh.
And get this, Arthur Andersen, remembering his own exhaustion from night school, believed that training should happen during working hours.
Oh, that's interesting.
He didn't want his people burning out studying at night like he had to. He wanted them sharp. He wanted them fresh. He was actually incredibly progressive for the
It
time.
really was. And it must have built a loyalty that was unmatched.
Absolutely. If you were an Arthur android,
Yeah.
you were the elite. You were the Marine Corps of accounting. You walked a certain way, you talked a certain way, and you had that think straight, talk straight ethos tattooed on your brain.
So, for decades, this is the vibe. High standards, deep integrity, uniform excellence. Arthur Andersen himself runs the firm until his death in 1947. But obviously, the company outlives him.
It thrives. It expands globally. It becomes a juggernaut. But as we move into the 1970s and 80s, the DNA of the firm starts to mutate.
Hmm.
And this is where we enter the second act of our tragedy. We move from the founder to the split personality.
This is where the consultants come in, right? This is the crack in the foundation.
Exactly. You have to understand the structure. You have the audit side, the traditional CPAs checking the books, the think straight, talk straight folks. But then, starting in the 70s, you have the consulting wing.
And why did consulting get so big? What changed?
Technology, computers,
Mhm.
systems integration. Companies didn't just need someone to count their money anymore. They needed someone to help them install the computer systems to track the money. They needed strategy. And Andersen was really, really good at this.
So the consulting wing just took off.
It started growing much, much faster than the auditing and tax side. And this is where the tension starts. I mean, real tension.
I can just picture it. The cool, fast-growing consulting kids with the slick suits versus the stodgy, rule-following audit parents.
It was worse than just a culture clash. It was about money. The way the firm was structured, the profits were pooled. So as the consultants started making money hand over fist, they resented the fact that they had to make what were called transfer payments to the auditing partners.
So if I'm a consultant, I'm bringing in all this new business, all this high-margin revenue, but I have to give a chunk of it to the auditors who are just growing at a snail's pace.
Precisely. They felt like they were subsidizing the slower growth part of the business. The feeling was, we're doing the heavy lifting and you guys are taking our lunch money. It created this deep bitterness.
So did the firm try to fix this? Did they see this civil war brewing?
They tried. In 1989, there was actually an attempt to merge with Price Waterhouse. The idea was to create a massive counterbalance to get bigger on the audit side, but it failed.
Why did it fail?
A couple of reasons. One was just radically different cultures. Price Waterhouse was seen as more white shoe, more, country club. Andersen was this scrappy, aggressive meritocracy.
Okay.
But also huge conflicts of interest. For example, Andersen had strong commercial links with IBM. They were selling them consulting services, while Price Waterhouse was IBM's auditor.
You can't be both a business partner and an independent auditor for the same company. That's a huge conflict.
Well, you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And that conflict is some serious foreshadowing for what happens later. So the merger collapsed, and the firm was stuck in this internal civil war.
So what did they do?
In 1989, they formally split the firm into two business units under one umbrella. Arthur Andersen, which was the auditors, and Andersen Consulting. And they spent the entire 1990s fighting.
A whole decade of infighting. That sounds toxic.
It was a bitter dispute over money, over independence, and over the brand name. Finally, it goes to arbitration. And in August 2000, the arbitrator drops a bomb.
Okay, what was the ruling?
Andersen Consulting was granted total independence. They were free. But there was a catch. Two catches, actually.
Go on.
First, the consultants had to pay Arthur Andersen, the audit side, $1.2 billion that had been held in escrow.
$1.2 billion. That's a nice parting gift.
It sounds like a lot. But the second catch was that Andersen Consulting had to surrender the Andersen name. They couldn't use it anymore.
So they lose the name. What do they become?
They rebranded as Accenture.
Oh, wow. Accenture is huge today. I had no idea they were born out of this divorce.
Massive success story. And they arguably got the better end of the deal, because for the Arthur Andersen side, the auditors, this ruling was actually a complete disaster.
Yet, how is getting $1.2 billion a disaster? I'm not following.
Because of expectations. The board of Arthur Andersen had set a much higher bar. They were convinced they were owed much more for, raising the consulting arm from infancy. The CEO of Arthur Andersen at the time, a guy named Jim Wadia, resigned just 4 hours after the ruling came out.
4 hours? Why so fast?
Because the board had passed a resolution saying Wadia had to resign if he didn't secure at least an incremental $4 billion from the split.
$4 billion?
He only got 1.2. The audit partners were expecting this massive payout to compensate for losing the consulting cash cow, and they just didn't get it.
So let's unpack the psychology here. It's the year 2000. Arthur Andersen, the audit firm, has just lost its fastest growing sibling. They've lost that guaranteed revenue stream from the consultants. They are, frankly, humiliated.
And they are desperate. This is the pivot point. They need to prove that they can grow just as fast as the consultants did. They need to replace that revenue. And this is where the erosion of standards kicks into high gear.
The pressure must have been immense.
It was. They were struggling to balance that historical faithfulness to think straight, talk straight, with a new, desperate need to maximize profits in the quarterly earnings era. The culture shifted from, we answer to the investors, to, we must keep the client happy at all costs.
Because if you lose a client, you lose revenue, and you're already behind the eight ball. It's a classic trap.
Exactly. And the warning signs were flashing red long before Enron. We tend to think of Enron as this singular event. But the truth is, Arthur Andersen was embroiled in multiple accounting frauds in the 90s and early 2000s.
So this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern.
A pattern, a rogues gallery of corporate scandals. You had Sunbeam Products.
Chainsaw L. Dunlap, that whole fiasco.
Right. Sunbeam was cooking the books to show massive growth, and Andersen signed off on it. You had Waste Management, a massive fraud involving depreciation schedules. You had Asia Pulp and Paper, the Baptist Foundation of Arizona, and importantly, WorldCom.
They had WorldCom too.
Yes, we'll get to WorldCom. But the point is, in the 1990s, Andersen wasn't spotting these frauds. They were allegedly facilitating them, or at the very least looking the other way.
Which is such a crazy contrast to the 1970s. I read that in the 70s, Andersen was actually the first to identify risks in the subprime market, and they voluntarily dropped clients that looked shady.
That's the tragedy right there in a nutshell. In the 70s, they fired clients who were risky because they valued their reputation more than the fees. In the 90s, they clung to them because they valued the fees more than the reputation.
They went from not enough money in Chicago to make me lie to how can we help you structure this so it looks okay?
That's it. And that brings us to the client that would end it all.
Enron.
Enron. The energy giant. The smartest guys in the room.
And for Arthur Andersen, their most lucrative client, they were charging Enron something like $1 million a week in fees.
$1 million a week.
Between audit fees and consulting fees, yes. And that's the other thing. After the split, Andersen had started to rebuild a consulting practice inside the audit firm. So they were back to doing exactly what they weren't supposed to do, auditing the same people they were consulting for. The conflict was back.
So just to give us some scale here, how bad was the Enron fraud? It was catastrophic. At the time, it was the biggest in history. Enron had fraudulently reported about $100 billion in revenue. It was systemic accounting fraud designed to hide massive debts and inflate earnings to make the stock price soar.
And when it finally unraveled, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history at that point.
It was. And Andersen was the auditor. They were the ones supposed to be checking the math. But they weren't just checking the math. They were deeply embedded.
What does that mean?
Well, the Powers Committee, which was appointed by Enron's own board to investigate, found that Andersen simply did not fulfill its professional responsibilities. They failed to alert the Enron board about major concerns regarding related party transactions.
Okay, related party transactions. Let's break that down for the listener. This is the core of the Enron scam.
Right. So Enron executives, specifically the CFO, Andrew Fastow, were setting up these side companies. The technical term is special purpose entities, or SPEs.
So shell companies.
Essentially, yes, shell companies. Enron would then take a bunch of bad debt or losing assets and sell them to the shell company. So it looks like the bad stuff is off Enron's books.
So if I have a car that doesn't run and I owe money on it, I sell it to my cousin's company, and now it's off my driveway and off my personal balance sheet.
Exactly. But here is the catch. Enron was often secretly guaranteeing the loans for the shell company. So the risk was still with Enron, but the paperwork made it look like it was gone. It was a shell game. And Andersen knew about it.
They knew.
They had to know. They were auditing the transactions. In fact, some evidence suggests they were charging fees to advise on how to set these things up.
That is a conflict of interest in a nutshell. Auditing your own advice.
It gets worse. The actual whistleblower who brought this all down was a woman named Sharon Watkins, an Enron VP. And here's the kicker. She was a former Arthur Andersen auditor.
No way. The call was coming from inside the house?
In a way, yeah. She had the Arthur Android training to spot it. She looked at the books and said, "This math doesn't work. This is a house of cards." She testified to Congress and implicated her former firm.
Wow.
But the real smoking gun wasn't just the bad auditing. Bad auditing gets you sued. You pay a massive fine, you settle. What destroyed them was the cover-up.
The shredding party.
The shredding party. This is where we move from professional negligence to outright crime.
So paint the scene for us. It's late 2001. The stock is cratering. The SEC is sniffing around. What happens at the Andersen offices in Houston?
Well, you have David Duncan, who's the lead partner for the Enron account, and you have Nancy Temple, an attorney from the legal department in Chicago. As the investigation is heating up on October 23rd, David Duncan calls an urgent meeting. And shortly after that meeting, a massive effort begins to destroy documents.
Like physical paper shredding in
Yeah.
2001.
Oh, yeah. Physical shredding of tons of documents. They brought in extra shredder trucks. They were shredding so much paper they literally couldn't keep up. And at the same time, they were deleting thousands upon thousands of emails. They were trying to wipe the trail clean before the investigators could seize the files.
That feels so panicked. It's not the calculated move of a mastermind. It's the move of someone who is terrified and cornered.
It was obstruction of justice. Plain and simple. You cannot destroy evidence when you know a federal investigation is looming. It's one of the cardinal sins.
And the government finds out.
Of course they find out. You can't shred that much paper without someone noticing. And the Department of Justice decides to make an example of them. They don't just indict David Duncan or Nancy Temple. They indict the entire firm.
The whole company.
The firm. Arthur Andersen, LLP. And the trial happens. On June 15, 2002, the verdict comes down. Arthur Andersen was convicted of obstruction of justice,
A felony conviction.
a felony. And for an accounting firm, that is a death sentence.
Okay, explain that to me. Why is it a death sentence? I mean, why couldn't they just pay a massive fine, fire the bad apples, and move on? Other big companies, banks, they get fined all the time and survive.
Because accounting is different. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has a very clear rule. They do not accept audits from convicted felons.
Ah.
If you are a public company in America, you must be audited by an SEC-approved firm. It's the law. The moment Andersen was convicted, they lost their license to practice before the SEC. They literally could not do their job anymore.
So every single public client they had.
Had to fire them. Immediately. They had no choice. If you were Coca-Cola or Delta Airlines or any of their thousands of clients, you had to fire Andersen that day, or you would be delisted from the stock exchange.
Wow. So the revenue goes to zero overnight.
Essentially, yes. On August 31st, 2002, Andersen formally agreed to surrender its CPA licenses. The firm, for all intents and purposes, went out of business.
This is the part that I find really heartbreaking. We're talking about 28,000 employees.
Yes. And the vast, vast majority of them had nothing to do with Enron. They were the Arthur androids in offices in Kansas City or Frankfurt or Milwaukee, just doing their jobs, checking inventories, following the rules.
It's the ultimate tragedy of the commons. A handful of people in the Houston office and the legal department in Chicago made these decisions, and 28,000 people lost their livelihoods.
It was an exodus. The firm just wound down its American operations. Partners and entire offices scrambled to find lifeboats. They migrated to competitors, KPMG, Ernst & Young, Deloitte, Grant Thornton. They swooped in and bought up local Andersen offices for pennies on the dollar.
The carcass was picked clean.
Completely. By 2005, a firm of 20,000 was reduced to a skeleton crew of about 200 people, mostly just lawyers and administrators handling the endless lawsuits.
So the giant is dead. The corpse has been picked clean, my competitors. The name Arthur Andersen is synonymous with fraud. End of story. But then there's a plot twist. A twist so wild I had to read it twice.
The Supreme Court ruling of 2005, Arthur Andersen, LLP v. United States.
3 years after the firm is basically destroyed, the case goes to the highest court in the land. And what do they decide?
They unanimously reversed the conviction.
Unanimously. You mean 9-9
9-0. Every single justice agreed.
So wait a minute. Does that mean Andersen was innocent? Did they get a raw deal?
It's complicated. This is where we have to be very careful with our legal terms. The Supreme Court didn't say Andersen did nothing wrong. They didn't say no documents were shredded. They certainly didn't say Enron wasn't a fraud.
So what did they say?
They said the trial was flawed, specifically the jury instructions.
The instructions given to the jury by the judge at the end of the trial.
Right. In a criminal trial, the judge gives the jury a set of instructions on how to apply the law to the facts. The Supreme Court ruled that the instructions in this case were way too vague. They allowed the jury to convict Andersen of obstruction of justice without proving that the firm knew it was breaking the law.
This is that concept of corrupt persuasion, right?
Yes, that's the legal term at the heart of it. The statute used the term corruptly persuades. The Supreme Court said that to be corrupt, you have to have a consciousness of wrongdoing. You have to know that what you are doing is illegal and you're trying to impede a specific official proceeding.
Okay.
The jury instructions were so broad, that they could have convicted Andersen just for following their standard document retention policy, even if they didn't have the specific intent to obstruct the SEC investigation.
So because of a technicality in how the judge talked to the jury, because the bar for conviction was set too low, the whole thing is thrown out.
Correct. The Chief Justice at the time, Rehnquist, wrote that the instructions diluted the meaning of corruptly.
But it's 2005. The firm is already dead.
Exactly. It was a moral victory, perhaps, but a Pyrrhic one. A completely hollow victory. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a statement saying there is no putting the company back together. Andersen was, by that point, a zombie firm.
Did the government ever try to retry them on the case?
No. Former U.S. attorneys and the government decided it would defy common sense. Why spend millions of taxpayer dollars prosecuting a corpse? The firm had no assets, no employees, no clients. It was over.
But there is a huge what if here, isn't there? I mean, if the trial hadn't happened, or if the instructions had been correct and they were acquitted back in 2002, could Arthur Andersen have survived Enron?
Kurt Eichenwald, who wrote the book Conspiracy of Fools, which is really the definitive book on the Enron scandal, argues, no, not a chance.
But why not?
Because of WorldCom.
Ah, right. The other massive fraud that was happening at the same time.
The WorldCom fraud was revealed just days after the Enron conviction in June 2002. It was another massive accounting scandal involving billions of dollars, actually bigger than Enron in terms of the assets involved. And guess who their auditor was?
Arthur Andersen.
Arthur Andersen. So they strike out twice in a row on the biggest corporate frauds in American history.
So Eichenwald's argument is that even if they had somehow limped away from Enron, the 1-2 punch of WorldCom would have killed them anyway.
It would have. The reputation was simply too toxic. Trust is the only product an auditor really has. If nobody trusts your signature, you don't have a business. The market would have killed them even if the government didn't.
So let's talk about the aftermath. The crater left by this explosion, it didn't just end a company, it changed the laws, didn't it?
Oh, a huge regulatory impact. The scandals of Enron and WorldCom and Andersen's role in them were the primary drivers for the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002.
SOX, every corporate accountant's favorite acronym.
It drastically increased oversight. It established the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, the PCAOB, to watch the watchers. It put strict rules on auditor independence, basically trying to prevent exactly what happened with Andersen, where the consulting and auditing lines got completely blurred.
So now you can't be the auditor and the big money consultant for the same client.
Generally, no. There are very strict limits. It also made executives personally liable for the accuracy of their financial statements. If the numbers are fake, the CEO can go to jail.
So, in a way, Arthur Andersen's death made the whole system stronger. Or at least it tried to.
That's the hope.
And what about the pieces of the firm? We mentioned Accenture. They're the big winner here.
Accenture is the thriving survivor. They are a global giant in consulting and professional services today. They really dodged a bullet by splitting off when they did.
And getting forced to change their name turned out to be the luckiest break in corporate history.
Absolute luck. If they had kept the Andersen name, they might have been dragged down too, just by association.
What about the other parts? Where did those 28,000 people go?
Well, a lot of them landed at the other big firms. But some interesting offshoots happened. There's a company called Protiviti that was formed by about 700 former Andersen professionals who specialized in internal audit and risk consulting. They were hired by Robert Half International and essentially reconstituted as a new firm.
And I've heard the name Andersen is actually back in some form.
It is, which is fascinating. In 2014, a group of former partners who had started a tax firm called WTAS bought the rights to the Andersen name. They rebranded as Andersen Tax, and later Andersen Global.
So name lives on, but it's a tax firm now, not an audit firm.
Right. It's a different entity, legally speaking, but it's trying to reclaim the lineage, the original think straight, talk straight ethos.
And what about the Q Center, that big training facility?
The Q Center in St. Charles, Illinois. The place where the androids were made. It's still there. It's a huge conference center. It's still used for training, offered by Accenture and other big companies. It stands as a physical monument to the sheer scale of what Andersen used to be.
And the original legal entity, Arthur Andersen LLP, is it just gone?
It still technically exists, but it's owned by these limited liability companies called Omega Management. It doesn't do business. It just exists to handle any lingering legal cleanup.
Yeah.
It's a ghost, a shell.
So we've gone from the orphan boy in 1913, studying by candlelight, to the global empire, to the shredding room, to the Supreme Court, and finally to a ghost ship.
It's quite a journey. Really is.
When you look at this whole story, what is the big takeaway for you? What's the lesson?
For me, it's about the fragility of culture. Arthur Andersen spent nearly a century building a culture of integrity. Think straight, talk straight. It took decades to build that reputation into an ironclad asset.
Right.
But it only took a few years of chasing short-term profits, of prioritizing client fees over public duty, to burn it all to the ground.
It's that famous idea. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it.
Exactly. And the irony is just, it's so painful. The firm that was founded on the idea that you answer to the investors, not the client, died because it helped a client lie to investors.
And the firm with the motto, think straight, talk straight, ended its life arguing in the Supreme Court about the precise definition of corrupt persuasion.
You couldn't write a more poetic or tragic ending.
So here is a question for you. Listening to this right now. We live in a world that is even more high pressure than the 1990s. The quarterly earnings pressure hasn't gone away. If anything, it's gotten worse.
The speed of information, the speed of markets, it's all accelerated.
Right. So is it actually possible for a firm to grow as large as Arthur Andersen did, to become a global behemoth, without eventually compromising the very standards that built it? When the choice is between responsibility to the public and keeping a $100 million client happy, which one actually wins today?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Something to think about the next time you see a corporate earnings report. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.